I woke up, same as any other day, except it wasn't. There was this weight hanging over me. The kind that feels like someone's just sitting on your chest. You know it's not real, but the pressure's there. My girls were already running around, same as always. I made them breakfast, kissed them goodbye when it was time for school. I guess I'd been a bit off for a while now. Gene knew. I could tell. He's always looking at me, trying to figure me out, I suppose. Can't blame him. Sometimes, I can't figure myself out. We've been together forever. Well, since I was 20. That's forever, right? I don't know what I was even thinking back then. We have 3 beautiful girls, a nice home. It's the picture everyone wants. So what's wrong with me? Then, Pierre came along. I'd be lying if I said he didn't make me feel alive again. I didn't know what I was missing until I had it with him. Maybe it was wrong, but it felt so right. That thrill of hiding things, of meeting in secret. It made me feel young again, like we were playing hooky from our lives. Jean found out, of course. One of the girls must have said something. He was broken. I'd never seen him like that, quiet and sad. All those times watching him trying to figure me out, I should have been trying to figure him out. I wanted to tell him I still loved him, but it wouldn't be true. I told him I was in love with Pierre. I expected screaming. Maybe things flying around as he throws stuff. But no, Jean just looked defeated. He asked me to stop seeing Pierre, said we could fix this, but we couldn't. I wasn't the same Marie anymore. Funny how all this started with me feeling stuck, and now here I am, stuck somewhere new. Pierre wasn't happy about all of this either. Turns out, secrets make him just as uncomfortable as they do me. Sophie, his wife, found out too. I think she was always kinda suspicious, women usually are. Pierre called me yesterday, said he couldn't leave his family, said he needed to focus on his daughter. He was choosing them, not me. I knew he would. My days blurred together for a while, everything a gray mess of laundry and empty plates. It's funny how even when you want something to be over, when it actually happens, it still feels like a punch to the gut. I'd see Pierre around town sometimes. His face always looked a little sad. Maybe I was just projecting. But knowing it was over, that I couldn't just call or text or run into him, that was hard. Jean tried to get me back. He'd bring flowers, cook dinners. It was sweet, and part of me felt guilty. Not guilty about Pierre, but guilty that I'd hurt my husband so badly and still couldn't go back on what I'd said. I'm sorry. I'd tell him, but I can't pretend anymore. We ended up having one of those ugly lawyer meetings you see on TV. Only, ours was quiet and sad, nobody yelling. Just a bunch of papers and polite talk while you're dying inside. That's the thing about real life, the big moments aren't loud like in the movies. They're this uncomfortable silence no one knows how to fill. Jean got the house. Made sense since the girls mostly stayed with him now. I didn't fight it. I found this tiny apartment on the other side of town. It was a fresh start, but every night I'd cry myself to sleep on my bare mattress. My mom said I needed therapy, that I couldn't do this alone. The therapist was nice enough, I guess. I sat there and tried to explain it all to her, about feeling stuck and then not so stuck and then just lost. Then, a few months later, I ran into Sophie at the store. We both looked terrible, probably both still crying ourselves to sleep most nights. Turns out Pierre was exactly who I thought he was. A cheater. Their marriage was over, same as mine. I was surprised how angry it made me. How dare Pierre ruin 2 families? Then, even more surprising, I felt a little pang of, something like pity for Sophie. In that moment, in the frozen food aisle, I think we both understood that it wasn't about either of us. It was about him. Time didn't make things easier, just different. I still missed Pierre. The therapist lady kept telling me it was an addiction, not real love. Maybe she was right. One day, Pierre called. We met for coffee, nervous like teenagers. We talked about our lives, our regrets, all of it. He looked older somehow, lines on his face I hadn't noticed before. Maybe I looked older too. In the end, we tried again. It felt like coming home, but a home doesn't have strong foundations. You're always a little scared the walls might fall down. Sure, we were happy in the beginning. But there were those looks he'd give me sometimes, a mix of hesitation and something I couldn't quite name. We both knew this wasn't a fairy tale ending. Meanwhile, life with my girls was a whole different battle. They wouldn't talk to me at first, wouldn't even look my way. Can't blame them. You ruined everything. My middle one finally yelled at me one night. I just stood there, tears streaming down my face, 'cause she was right. I tried baking their favorite cookies, taking them to the park. It was like pushing a boulder uphill. I heard from Jean that Pierre's kid hated me too. At least my girls weren't alone in being mad. Pierre tried to talk to her, but teenagers. They can hold grudges better than anyone. I told him not to force it, to just give her time. It was the least I could do after the mess we'd caused. He was going through it too. Sometimes at night, I'd hear him on the phone with Sophie, the voices muffled, but the sadness was clear as day. Turns out, when you jump into a relationship built on lies, the cracks start to show real fast. Our kids made sure of that. Pierre's daughter wouldn't even speak to me in the beginning. My middle one started acting out, backtalking, staying out late, getting into fights at school. It was like all her anger and confusion had to come out somehow. Then his daughter started pulling similar stunts, and that's when it hit me that we couldn't just pretend to be one happy family. We tried therapy, the kind where the kids shout and you awkwardly try to hold everything together. It helped, kinda. At least the yelling was somewhere other than our kitchen. I won't lie, there were days when I wanted to scream at Pierre, "This is your fault." But the kids needed us to be adults, even when we felt like kids ourselves. News came along that Jean was seeing someone. Alice, her name was. I saw them once, at the grocery store of all places. They looked normal. Happy in that simple way that makes you feel a little sick inside. Sophie got a boyfriend too, David. I guess everyone was moving on, weren't they? Pierre and I talked about it. We joked about double dates, but there was this sadness underneath. Like, this wasn't how it was supposed to be. He'd say things like, if we had met under different circumstances. As if that mattered now. We were here, stuck in this messy life we'd made. One night, he looked at me from across the dinner table and said, maybe this is our second chance. Maybe we can get this right. I knew what he meant. A wedding. A fresh start. Try to erase the past. Part of me wanted to laugh, to say, what fresh start? We're standing in the rubble. But somehow, the words that came out of my mouth were, yeah, maybe we can. The wedding was, well, it was a wedding. Not the big white dress kind I had all those years ago with Jean. We did it at the courthouse, our kids with us and a few friends. His daughter gave me one of those half smiles, but at least she was there at all. My girls seemed mostly bored. Later, eating cheap cake off paper plates, Jean's girlfriend, Alice, hugged me. It felt weird but sincere. I think she understood that even in this whole mess, I didn't wish anyone ill. It's life, you move on the best you can. Pierre and I got this little house not too far from where we both used to live. It needed work, but I liked the idea of fixing it up together. We painted the living room this soft blue, and for a while, it felt like maybe this was it. A real family. The honeymoon was the real bright spot, though. Hawaii. Never thought I'd see it. We swam, hiked, even tried surfing, though we were terrible at it. Lying on the beach, his hand on mine, I finally let myself believe maybe things would be different this time around. But real life isn't a 2-week vacation. Getting back, his daughter was still distant, my girls and I still had those strained conversations. We did family dinners on Sundays. Pierre and I would put on a good face, but sometimes I could swear his daughter would look at us with this disgust. She wasn't wrong, was she? It made my stomach turn. The fights with Pierre weren't loud ones, more like simmering resentment under the surface. Over stupid stuff. Dishes left in the sink, who mowed the lawn? It was like all that baggage from our past lives, all the guilt, was too heavy to keep hiding. One night, I was sobbing at the kitchen table, and he just said, "This isn't working, is it?" And I knew it wasn't. It's funny how even when you're the one ending things, it still feels like a punch to the gut. The relief is there, but underneath it all, there's still sadness. After Pierre moved out, that emptiness settled in again. It was different this time. Not the desperate kind I felt right after Jean left, but a quieter emptiness. Then the invites came. Jean and Alice were getting married. A big wedding, with flowers and a church and everything. I put on a brave face for my girls. I'm happy for him, I'd say, but I knew they could see right through me. Sophie's invite came next. Similar deal, a whole weekend thing at some fancy location. I got drunk at my kitchen table and cried when I got that one. The worst part was seeing Pierre at the weddings, forced polite smiles and small talk while the couples beamed, proof that happily ever after could exist, just not for us. Each time, I'd leave feeling that emptiness grow a little bigger. I wasn't jealous of Jean and Sophie. Okay, maybe a little. But it was more like this sinking feeling that I'd messed up my chances at happiness. We have the kids on rotating weekends, this awkward dance of custody agreements and shared holidays. There was a lot of forced normalcy, and every time I saw Pierre's face, that hollowness inside would spread. My therapist said to give it time, but time felt like the enemy. With every year that passed, the hope of finding someone, anyone, slowly faded. Maybe this was it for me. Maybe I was one of those people who just keeps breaking things and never gets to fix them. You know that saying, be careful what you wish for. It should have been flashing in bright neon lights in my head. Because wouldn't you know it, I got pregnant. An accident, Pierre called it, but that emptiness I'd been feeling. I think a little part of me wanted to fill it. Maybe I thought a baby could bring us back to that honeymoon feeling. At first, it was okay. The sickness wasn't too bad, and my girls were excited to have a baby brother. That gave me a boost of optimism. But then, the problems started. Constant nausea, doctor's appointments, and Pierre always had some excuse, a late meeting, a business trip. I got that he was busy, but it felt like I was doing this alone. The worst was the bed rest. Doctors said it was high risk. So, I'm stuck on the couch for months, watching my belly grow, and the space between Pierre and me growing too. He'd come home late, smelling of that perfume his secretary wore. That made the doubts creep in, even when I wanted to push them down. Finally, the baby came. A boy, we named him Ben. Holding him, this tiny perfect thing. It made some of that resentment fade. Pierre seemed happy too, but that honeymoon feeling? It never came back. New problems took its place. Money was tight. The baby cried all the time. Sleep became this mythical treasure that neither of us could find. Our arguments weren't even about the affair anymore, just stupid stuff. Dishes in the sink, who's changing the next diaper? Under it all, though, was this unspoken thing. We both knew that another kid wasn't going to fix this. He looked at me sometimes, and it was like he saw a stranger, a tired version of the woman he'd run away with. Some nights, I couldn't even recognize myself. It started with those little things, the kind that gnaw at you. Pierre being extra careful with his phone, coming home with his shirt smelling like her perfume again. My gut told me something was wrong, even when I didn't want to listen. Then one night, I was scrolling through his messages, stupid, I know, but there it was. Texts from Sophie, not about their kid, but personal stuff, asking how he was doing. When I confronted him, he went quiet at first, then defensive. It's just about co-parenting, nothing more. Liar, liar, liar. All that guilt, the whole reason we broke up their family, was it for nothing? It felt like a sick joke, the kind the universe loves to play on me. The house became this war zone. The kids fought non-stop. All three of my daughters were angry, and his acted like I was a monster. Every day started with yelling and ended with tears, mostly mine. Sleep was impossible. I felt myself unraveling, but I didn't know where to turn. Then one night, Jean called. It had been years. He just asked if I was okay. Heard some rumors about me and Pierre. It all came spilling out, the fights, my suspicions, everything. His voice was soft, and for a moment, it was like we were back together before all the bad happened. He didn't say, "I told you so," just listened. Pierre found out, of course. Saw some text from Jean on my phone, blew his top. Called me a whore, the whole 9 yards. It was like all his anger, at himself, at me, just exploded. When I refused to apologize, he kicked me out. Said the house was his. That night, I drove to Jean's. It was pathetic. Showing up on his doorstep, suitcase in hand, tears streaming down my face. But he let me in. Made me some tea. I slept in his guest room, and for the first time in ages, it felt quiet. Of course, in a town this size, the gossip spread like wildfire. Did you hear about Marie, the homewrecker? Kicked out by her husband. People at the grocery store would look at me like I had a disease. This had become my life. A broken mess that everyone got to watch like a bad soap opera. Lawyers. Courtrooms. Custody hearings. My life was now a series of ugly legal terms. Pierre wanted full custody of his daughter, and he was going to use everything I'd done as ammo. Every tear I'd cried in front of Jean. Every whispered confession on his couch. It was all evidence of my unfitness as a mother. Then, the real gut punch came. I lost my girls. Not all the way, but they mostly lived with Jean. The judge talked about stability, but what he meant was that I was a mess. And I was. Crying in my car, waking up shaking. It was all on display for the world to judge. Jean tried, I give him that. But I was this black hole in his house, sucking in all the light his new life had. One night, he sat me down. I care about you, Marie, but this. I can't take it on. It's too much. Too much. That's what I'd become. My job let me go. Something about how the gossip was bad for the company image. It was like all the pieces of my life were crumbling around me. My apartment got smaller and dingier. Sometimes dinner was a bag of chips because it's what I could afford. It got worse. Sophie came after me next. Seems Pierre wasn't being the best dad after all. Too busy being angry to actually parent. So she used my whole situation against him in court, and she was winning. This was rock bottom, I thought. But you know what? It can go even lower. Turns out there's a whole world of rock bottoms. Each one worse than the last. First, Pierre lost it all too. Turns out, screaming at your ex in front of a judge doesn't help you win custody cases. Sophie got full rights to their daughter, and the smug look on her face in court. I wanted to scratch it right off. Pierre blamed me, of course. Said I ruined his life. Swore he'd never speak to me again. Which, to be honest, wasn't the worst thing in the world. But I still had lower to fall. The stress, the shame. At first, a few glasses of wine helped me sleep. Then it was a whole bottle, then even more. Before I knew it, the liquor store guy knew my name. I started missing work, then lost my apartment. There were blurry nights, waking up on park benches, not remembering how I got there. That scared me sober for a day or two, then the cycle started back up. My girls wouldn't even talk to me. I saw them sometimes, Jean would let me have them for a few hours. Their faces were hard now, not the sweet little girls I used to know. One day, after another fight, my oldest yelled at me, "I hate you. Why did you do this to us?" I had no answer. The worst night came when I passed out behind a dumpster. Woke up with rats scurrying nearby. And I thought, maybe this was it. Maybe the world would be better off without me in it. There were pills in my bag, too many of them. It could all be over, just like that. But then, I saw my girls' faces again. The looks of disgust, but underneath. Was there still a flicker of love? Of hope? I threw the pills down a sewer. There had to be another way. It may take years, but I owed it to